Thank you so much, Dr. Greco. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Distinguished participants, during these brief remarks, I'll take a developing country perspective on climate change, and I will try to highlight some of the major areas of action needed by the leaders of the G20, as well as unresolved research and policy questions for the global think tank community. Energy and transportation systems together account for about 70% of carbon emissions globally. It follows that without decarbonizing energy and transport infrastructure, we simply cannot achieve net zero by mid-century. Developing countries now account for a substantial share of global carbon emissions from both energy and transportation, as well as the bulk of anticipated emissions growth. So their future trajectory is critical to the achievement of global targets. However, the story of decarbonization is very different between the energy and transport sectors, as we'll now see. Let's start with energy, where there has been encouraging progress. Renewable energy now accounts for the vast majority of new electricity generation capacity additions. Although long asset lives means that the share of renewable electricity actually generated is creeping up much more slowly and still only accounts for about a quarter of the total. Renewable electricity generation is now cost competitive with fossil fuels on a levelized cost of energy basis in an increasing range of contexts. Recent solar auctions in the developing world are now delivering remarkably low prices of around 2 cents a kilowatt hour. However, due to the intermittent nature of renewable energy, there's still a need to combine with other resources such as hydropower and gas to achieve firm energy supply. Therefore, battery storage remains the key to overcoming intermittency and allowing full substitution of renewable for thermal energy. While costs of batteries are coming down rapidly, significant challenges still remain in widespread deployment of batteries. These include how to price the complex range of battery services to incentivize investment. Also, how to ensure adequate supply of rare earth minerals for the manufacture of batteries, since these are sourced mainly from fragile and conflict-affected states across the developing world. Until recently, policy focus has been on promoting uptake of clean energy. However, equally important for successful decarbonization is how to support countries in decommissioning the fossil fuel value chain all the way from mines to power stations, according to just transition principles. Relative to advanced economies, developing countries face the additional just transition challenge of ensuring that decarbonization does not come at the expense of universal access. However, a key problem is that the rate of renewable penetration remains much higher in the electricity sector at 27% than in the heating or cooling sector at only 9%, or the transport sector at just 3%. This reflects greater technical challenges for these other uses, as well as about twice as much effort dedicated by policymakers to electricity than to other uses of energy, according to the World Bank's policy index RISE. Increasingly, the solution is seen in terms of migrating these other energy uses, heating, cooling, transportation, onto electricity to hasten their decarbonization in a process that's becoming known as the electrification of everything. Let's turn now to the transport sector, where the process of decarbonization is much further behind, and the challenge is more complicated due to the different transport modes involved: road, rail, sea, air. Also, there are many different transport actors whose behavior needs to be modified. It's helpful to think about the decarbonization of transport in terms of 3 levers: avoid, shift, and improve. The avoid lever means using territorial planning to reduce the need for travel, for example, by better design of cities, restructuring of global value chains, or migration of services onto digital platforms. The shift lever means switching as many trips as possible from more carbon-intensive modes, such as private road transportation and aviation, to less carbon-intensive modes, such as public road transportation, rail, river, and air, and sea. The improve lever means reducing the carbon footprint of all transportation modes. Increasingly, this will mean shifting to electric vehicles for passengers and lighter loads, as well as potentially to hydrogen fuel for heavier loads. In many advanced economies, much of the policy discussion on the decarbonization of transport centers on the adoption of electric vehicles. maybe because the existing transportation is already relatively efficient and renewable penetration on the power grid is rising. However, in many developing countries, these two assumptions do not hold, and there is greater scope to focus on transitional measures to bring down the carbon footprint of transportation, particularly reducing the emissions intensity of road transport through scrapping older vehicles, tightening fuel efficiency standards, improving public transportation systems, and raising vehicle occupancy ratios. As the impetus toward decarbonization of energy and transportation accelerates, a pressing cross-cutting issue is the creation of a rational framework for energy pricing. Fossil fuel subsidies continue to depress energy prices and encourage wasteful consumption. Distorted electricity tariff structures may prevent a rational uptake of rooftop solar and electric vehicles. And ultimately, carbon taxation will be needed to provide the correct price signal for energy consumption. Finally, international cooperation such as the G20 and development assistance is crucial to support developing countries in making the transition. And my presentation has highlighted many of the pending research questions relevant to think tanks. As part of this process, the World Bank recently announced its Climate Change Action Plan, committing the organization to be 100% Paris compliant by mid-2023. In sum, the decarbonization of energy and transport sectors in the developing world lies very much on the critical path to net zero emissions by mid-century. Thank you.